Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck episode number 106. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I'm joined by my co-host Bryan Smith. Bryan, we're back in action. I guess it's been 3 weeks for me and you, right? It feels like
Yeah,
this past few weeks have been really off for me, and so like I don't. It feels like I'm recording a podcast for the first time in like 2 years right now.
sure. Yeah, I mean, you've had some things happen between now and then that might feel like you're living a new life.
I was gonna say it's almost like throwing a child into the mix makes things not a normal schedule. So actually, but honestly, for today, we're recording this on Monday night like we typically do. A little bit not quite as late as we typically do, but we're here to talk Cubs prospects. And really, this episode is just kind of a. Typically, we go into episodes and we have a structure to a certain degree. You and I talk in the week leading up, and we say, hey, we're going to talk about player X, Y, and Z throughout the episode, and for this one, we don't have that. We're just kind of riffing a little bit. We're going off the top of our domes here as far as what we want to talk about. I went through like half an hour before we started recording and went through some of my tweets from the past couple weeks and looked at who I was talking about online. I was like, oh, I can talk about that on podcast form. So I've got a few names here, but it feels like there's one name that we should be talking about first and foremost right at the top, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are moments where the minor leagues, I think in general, when you have a first place team, should sort of fade in the background. They should be just sort of an extra bonus. But when you get a breakout prospect to the level of reaching top 100 and higher status, it sort of does make a big organizational difference. It's maybe more important than an individual win-loss in the major league season sometimes even. And what Jaxon Wiggins is doing over the last couple weeks, sort of stepping forward and, in my opinion, becoming the best Cubs pitching prospect not named Cade Horton since at least Braylon Marquez.
Yeah.
And maybe even, in the neighborhood of where Braylon was, I think, is really meaningful, especially as we're entering sort of the next 6 weeks with the major league team having to make some big decisions on its pitching staff for the second half.
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about Jaxon Wiggins on this show over the past, I don't know, a couple months now. And a lot of times on the show, we try to share the love, spread the love a little bit, and talk about all the different prospects all up and down the system. But Jaxon Wiggins is a guy that's deserved to have as much conversation on the show and online and wherever as possible, given his breakout. Because it is a legitimate breakout. I know that you kind of gave a scouting report. You posted a scouting report online of Jaxon Wiggins, and if a guy is getting the full blown scouting report from you on somewhere other than Discord, then it must be a pretty legit dude. Yeah, man, it's so encouraging. I think that it's a mix of multiple things where you've got this Cubs pitching development infrastructure in place that we've believed in to a certain degree for quite some time now. You've got a power arm and a really talented arm in Jaxon Wiggins coming into the mix, and like the combination of those two things together make for a really impressive season in 2025 for Jaxon.
Yeah, even since the Cubs built the pitch lab, I don't know what it was, maybe 8 years ago, they have had the ability and been fairly successful in teaching new pitches and stuff to players. I mean, we've talked, I don't know how many times over the years about a certain guy's new sweeper or, a new changeup or something that sort of stems from that pitch lab. Jackson's breakout the last couple weeks is not that. It's and I don't think pitching departments around baseball are particularly good at helping players improve their control and command grades, especially these days in which it's like just continue to push the envelope and in throwing harder and throwing the most stuff plus pitches you can. A lot of times we're seeing the feel go by the wayside and sort of a hope and pray approach that eventually the player finds it. It really does feel like Jaxon has found it here, but that it's not by luck, that it is something sort of deliberate and that a plan has come together here. And that is really, I think, what's happened because, I'm not seeing a secondary pitch that's like particularly better than it was 2 months ago or even last year. I mean, he's throwing a curveball now that he didn't throw a ton of last year. But But I don't think that's what's making the difference. To me, what's making the difference is just the fastball is absolutely dominating people. And last year he was missing his fastball location by, it seemed like a foot or two. And now if he misses it, he's missing it in the right spot, and it's a couple inches. And man, what a difference it's made.
Yeah, I posted online his numbers in high A this year. The breakout is across high A and double A this year. Like, it's been really, really good compared to his performance last year in single A and high A in South Bend. But he's made 6 starts both in South Bend and Knoxville this year. And the numbers across the board, both in terms of like product, like the typical production, the ERA, the WHIP, the strikeout percentage, like stuff like that, is the exact same. But also like the under the hood numbers, like the CSW, the home runs per fly ball, the pitches per inning, the swing per, like every single number across the board is wildly consistent from his 6 starts in high A South Bend to his 6 starts in double A Knoxville. It's like weird how similar,
even like a little better in double A too.
Exactly. Yeah. The only difference that I've seen for the most part is that his walk percentage from high A to double A has gone down 4%. It's down to 8.4% this year in double A. And that's where he wants to live at, is that 8%, not that 12%. That makes a big, big difference in what he's doing on the mound, in addition to him commanding the ball, in addition to the control. And so that's not normal for him to jump up a level and just continue to produce the same exact results that he did at a lower level than he was prior. So I guess we can end the Jaxon Wiggins talk. I'll ask 2 questions of you, and we can kind of talk about it a little bit, because they're the 2 questions I've been getting day in and day out online. It is, 1, when will he get bumped up to AAA Iowa? And 2, is there a chance that we see him? I guess there's three questions, right? 1, when will he be in AAA Iowa? 2, will he make it up to Chicago this year in 2025? And 3, is he a top 100 prospect already right now? I'll toss it to you to answer any of the above.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the third one. Yes, he's a top 100 prospect. I think that I said on Twitter the other day, I think you can make a better argument that he's the number 1 prospect in the system than you could make the argument that he's number 5. I think he is closer to 1 than he is to 5.
Now that Matt Shaw and Cade Horton have graduated.
Correct. And yeah, I mean, I think he's the most valuable asset in the minor leagues for the Cubs. I think he passes Ballesteros in that category because of how valuable young pitching is. As far as this year goes, I would have written off the idea of Chicago in 2025. I still think it's unlikely, but he's succeeding in a way that I don't think it makes sense anymore to sort of put a cap on where this goes. Because, if he continues dominating double A for, I don't know, 2-3 more weeks, he's going to go to triple A. And if he dominates triple A for a month, if he really dominates triple A, man, you're talking about a team that has real ambitions, that, their entire goal is going to be to put the best 13 people they have on a pitching staff by the second half of September. Do I think that it's impossible that Jaxon Wiggins is one of the Cubs' best 13 pitchers in 3 months? I don't. And I'm surprised to be saying that, because, as intriguing as Jaxon was to me last year, he was equally as frustrating because of those misses that I talked about, and because of the inconsistency you would get from one inning to the next. And it reminds me a little bit of Daniel Palencia this year, where it's like somebody has convinced him, like, hey, like, we're good. If you just want to throw 99 down the middle for a little bit, like, and then build around that feel, that's fine with us. And like, the self-belief in doing that has really changed things.
Yeah, every week, after every start, somebody asks me about the Chicago. Will he debut in Chicago this year? And every week I say something to the tune of, like, some sort of chaos has to ensue in the Chicago bullpen for Jaxon Wiggins to make it up to Chicago by the end of the year. And each week I say that, I feel less and less confident with that answer, because he just continues to dominate. And you're right. There's right now, the Cubs bullpen is good. The Chicago Cubs bullpen is very, very, very good. And I keep talking from the standpoint of the bullpen, just because I think that he'll be reaching some sort of innings limits. And there's generally speaking, there's a lot of different rotation options, and then you're going to add in. Surely the Cubs will target a top of the rotation starter at the deadline, and so like I just don't see the rotation being a thing for Jaxon Wiggins this year. So I'm just kind of defaulting to the bullpen. But you got to figure the bullpen is really good right now in Chicago. There's quite a bit of depth. That Iowa bullpen is also tremendous this year, like really, really good. And then you throw in the fact that they will also be acquiring a reliever surely at the deadline this year. And so like there's a lot of different things going against Jaxon Wiggins to make his debut in that bullpen in Chicago. So like I still think chaos is going to have to happen, but like I said, I believe it less and less with each start.
I mean, the other thing we can't ignore is that every big trade that Jed Hoyer enters discussions into between now and July 31st, every single like high end target, the other team is going to ask for Jaxon Wiggins now. Like I feel confident in saying that almost every organization in baseball that's talking trades with the Cubs will ask for him. And I also feel confident that there are going to be players that are pretty solid that Jed's going to hold a firm line and say, no, like Wiggins is more valuable than that. But what's really going to be the most fascinating thing about this July to me is when Jed's feet get held to the fire for the top targets that he has for himself in July. When they say Jaxon Wiggins is in this deal or this deal does not get done, does Jed sort of have, like, how does Jed feel about this Jackson breakout? How does Jed feel about this team and what that particular trade addition does to its ceiling? Like, how that all coalesces at the end of July is to me like the most interesting discussion that's going to happen around the farm system in the next 6 weeks, because like some teams are going to like Moises Ballesteros, but I don't think all of them will. So Owen Caissie is the kind that I think will appeal to a couple organizations. Some will completely throw away. Jaxon Wiggins, like, he really probably does appeal to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is in every discussion. So can Jed find a way to not trade him is a question I sort of have.
Yeah, I said a few weeks ago, I think it was during the Q&A, like the pre-recorded episode that I had here, that I was talking about trade pieces, and I had Jaxon Wiggins as Moises Ballesteros as two guys where I just I don't see them being included in trade deadline deals because of, well, for different reasons, right? I think Moises is more valued in the Cubs organization than outside the Cubs organization would be my guess. And Jaxon Wiggins is like, man, trading away your new top pitching prospect by a long shot, right? We came into the season and it was like, oh, Jaxon Wiggins and Brandon Birdsell, and I don't even think we weren't talking about Will Sanders yet, obviously, because he hadn't broken out. But I think we were like, oh, Jaxon Wiggins and Brandon Birdsell, like they're right there. Yeah. Brandon Birdsell, I still believe in him a ton. We're going to see him hopefully pitching here in the next couple of months or so. By no fault of Brandon Birdsell's, Jaxon Wiggins is a tier above all else in terms of the pitching prospects in this organization. And so, like, if you're trading that, that's rough. Versus if you're trading Owen Caissie or Kevin Alcantara or even Jefferson Rojas or someone like that, which I think Jefferson Rojas probably doesn't get tossed in those trade talks, but there's other guys that are similar levels for some of those guys. Jaxon Wiggins is not at the same level on the pitching side of things. So yeah, that's going to be super interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit about with Matt Shaw and Cade Horton now graduating, about who is the number one the number one prospect in this organization. Because I know that obviously we saw Moises Ballesteros jump on the radars and jump up prospect lists from like the 5 or 6 range into like the number one conversation at the beginning of the year. Owen Caissie's always been hovering around there. Jaxon Wiggins is bursting onto the scene all of a sudden. Are you a Jaxon Wiggins number one prospect in the organization guy?
No, I'm not there yet. I mean, I still think Ballesteros, like, he's had a really great last 10 games or so. After he got back to Iowa, I think it took a little bit to get back in that groove, but he's been showing some power in the last 10 games and, back to being 1,000 OPS guy again. Still being that young at that level. He has that spot for me. This Wiggins thing has come on so fast that, there's always a little bit of caution that you put around that. And then I do think Jefferson Rojas is in that discussion. He's been out with injury, just returned yesterday. So he's right there too. I think those 3 guys are the top tier. Well, man, there's also an Owen Caissie conversation I want to
He's
have.
been
So
hot. He's been
let's
real hot.
let's table that and do that next, maybe, because I have some thoughts about him. But yeah, for me, it's Ballesteros. I know, the first base DH thing always scares you. So are you scared enough of that you're intrigued by these breakout guys?
All right, today is June 16th as we're recording this, and I can change my mind. I am allowed to change my mind come June 17th. Moises Ballesteros is my number one ranked prospect in the Cubs organization right now.
Okay. Okay.
There are enough questions about the other guys, about Jaxon Wiggins and him all of a sudden bursting onto the scene, or Owen Caissie and the strikeout rate and the inconsistencies in tapping into that home run power, Kevin Alcantara and his inability to hit breaking balls to a certain degree, Jefferson Rojas and not staying healthy long enough this season to prove that this is a legit thing what he's doing. There's enough questions across the board elsewhere that I feel good enough in looking at Moises Ballesteros and what he's done offensively to say that he's the number one prospect in the Cubs organization. But with all of those that's a lot of caveats for me to throw him number one. You know what I mean? Like if Jefferson Rojas does this another 2 months, like I probably feel confident enough to throw Jefferson Rojas above Moises Ballesteros. If Jaxon Wiggins does this another, like to the trade deadline and is still in the organization, then Jaxon Wiggins might be ranked above Moises Ballesteros for me. Like there's a lot of caveats, but today on June 16th, Mo is my number one guy.
Okay. Well, that's a feather in Mo's cap that he probably didn't think he was going to get,
That's I don't know if you were expecting that today, but yeah, I think that it's just a weird mix, right? And now that the Cubs, I posted a thread over on Blue Sky and on Twitter about the state of the organization. I don't know that I want to dig into that in its entirety for this episode because that could take a while. But
yeah,
the system is in just such a weird place right now. After, especially post Cade Horton and Matt Shaw graduations, which love that Matt Shaw and Cade Horton have been up in Chicago and been in the lineup enough to graduate by June. Like that's awesome. That's terrific. That's been the case because they've earned that. But what that leaves us with is just a much different looking system, one that relies on these top 100 guys, which are what we talked about: Moises and Owen Caissie and Rojas and Wiggins and Alcantara and Triantos, who's fallen down a few pegs for me as far as rankings go. Those guys, like we rely on those a whole lot more because the depth in the organization is just not good. I mean, I think after 15, if you're putting together a ranking after like the 15 to 20 range, it's a rough, like there's a lot of guys you can hope for, a lot of guys you can hope to break out, a lot of guys that you can hope to be major league depth at some point down the road, like lots of those types of guys, but like no real true depth like we've seen in the past few years. I guess dating back to like 2019, there's still pretty decent depth even before all the big major league trade-off in 2021. There was still good depth in the organization. There was no top end talent. Right now, there's a lot of top end talent, but no depth, and you're starting to lose the top end talent because they're graduating. So that's tough. Sorry, a little tangent.
Yeah, I mean, no, if you make a prospect list, for me, it's like you get to 12 or 13 and it gets tricky. And like, that's not to say that there's not some intriguing names beneath it. There actually is quite a bit, but it's like really unproven complex league guys, or it's guys that are almost surely relievers. You just get to that a little quicker than you do when the system's real deep. The offenses in Myrtle Beach and South Bend are, they're in peculiar places, and the complex league team has struggled so much.
I posted over on the 1060 West Discord channel my current top. I think I posted my top 30 as of right now, and all subject to change. I'll probably come out with like an actual top prospect list here around the time of the deadline or the draft or somewhere around there. But in that ranking, I had Brody McCullough ranked 29th, and you and I are both huge Brody McCullough fans. Like there's a lot of huge Brody McCullough fans out there. I know Arizona Phil posted. I also heard that Brody McCullough is getting surgery and is out for the rest of this year. And knowing that, I still have Brody McCullough at 29. And like, I love him. I think that he is super unique. I've raved about him on the show, but for a guy who's missed as much time as he has, like a lot of time due to injury, for him to still be ranked 29th kind of like paints a picture of the system a little bit in my eyes, you know?
Sure. Yeah, let me transition us to Owen Caissie, who's a part of that, who's a part of the top end of that system. But as we're talking about sort of system health, I feel like the prospect fatigue I feel in my mentions around Owen Caissie, and even from people who are like devout minor league fans, like in our Discord and stuff like that, it really feels like we have hit that point of maximum prospect fatigue where, Caissie's strengths and weaknesses are so well documented and so well understood at this point that there's really no practical conversation to be had about like what it's going to take for him to get over the hump. And it's made for an interesting thing to me where it's like he's still a really good prospect, and yet I don't really know how to have conversations about him anymore. And it's almost like people are like hoping that he gets traded because they're just like tired of the like will the strikeouts be a problem conversation. But like you're talking about a guy who's having his best month in AAA is happening right now. He's been absolutely on a tear lately, and we're still talking about somebody incredibly young for the level that is hitting balls harder than all but 12 humans alive. I don't know.
Two guys in AAA.
Yeah.
I think only Roman Anthony and Johnny Long are hitting the ball consistently harder than Owen Caissie. One of those guys was the top prospect in baseball and now in the major leagues with the Red Sox.
If his path to this point in AAA was just different, if he climbed the ladder differently, the discussion we'd be having about Owen Caissie would be so wildly different. And, I don't even know where I want to take the conversation, but to be like, let's all remember that there's a really good talent here. And, I think we do have a hand. I don't have to tell you what the problems are. You know them. We're gonna all find out together if the strikeouts are just too much in the major leagues. But he's going to play in the major leagues because he's a wildly talented player. And I don't know. I see it every single day when I talk about the minor leagues. It's just like tiredness.
You know what I think is hilarious with Owen Caissie is that when you're talking about Owen Caissie, fans of the major league team of the Chicago Cubs that don't follow prospects at all know everything there is to know about Owen Caissie at this point for multiple reasons. One, because we've been talking about him for the past 5 seasons, right?
Right.
So that's part of it. And they've heard enough of prospect nerds talk trickle up to them at the major league fans level. And because he's been in AAA now, this is his second season, and because he's been the same general player for his entire time in the system, he hasn't changed. Right. And so like you talk and get the elevator pitch for Owen Caissie from a Major League Cubs fan who has never watched a single minor league game or followed a single minor league stat, they could give you the same elevator pitch about Owen Caissie that me and you could. Yeah. And that's what makes him like super, super unique. And so, yeah, man, it's almost, I'm almost on to the point of the Brendan Miller mantra where it's like he needs to like let's get him up to the major league level. I'm not saying for the Cubs right now because I don't know how he fits or how that works or anything like that. But like it's almost to the point where it's like let's see how he can do against major league pitching, how that strikeout rate fares against major league pitching, how his style and hitting and using the opposite field but still trying his best to pull the ball in the air more. Like how does all of that work at the major league level? Because like we've seen how it works in AAA, and it's like still been productive, if not weird, right? But how does that work in the major league level? Again,
the cool thing that the last 2 or 3 weeks have done, like this step forward, is I can tell you if Ian Happ or Kyle Tucker, those two players, get injured in the next, call it 10 days or something, it's going to be Caissie, I'm pretty sure, that gets called up. I think he's now risen to be that. If it's Seiya, I think maybe it's Ballesteros again. There's a little bit of like conversation that they'd have to have around that. But I think that he's probably viewed as ready for a little trial if a need happens. And, like we've talked about all season, the Cubs being so good makes that whole calculus of calling guys up very sort of contextually dependent. But if a spot opens, he's done what he needed to be an option for the Cubs in, like you said, June 16th.
Yeah.
And so, kudos to him, and let's just hope this keeps going. A few more homers find their way over the fence, and as the weather warms up here, and still a prospect worth being excited about.
Homers in 4 of his last 7 games for Owen Caissie, hits in his last 10 games, and currently riding I think it's a 15 or 16 game on base streak. So it's been a real hot last couple weeks for him. So let's talk about a guy that we haven't talked about, Carter Trice, I think one single time on this podcast this season. And he definitely warrants some bit of conversation because he's been really, really good this season for South Bend at a level that, like, it feels like Carter Trice is older than he is. I don't know. Like, he's been in the organization. He was a college guy. He has already gone from being an infielder to a catcher to not a catcher anymore. He was a first baseman and a second baseman. And he's a center fielder now, and he's stealing bases. Like, we've seen, like, unlike Owen Caissie, who's been the exact same for his entire career with the Cubs, Carter Trice has been like 4 different versions of Carter Trice in the 2.5 years he's been in the organization.
Yeah.
But this year he's in South Bend. He's just slightly above league average in terms of his age, and he's putting up really strong numbers across the board. Let me see if I can get these pulled up here. But both in the power department, in the stolen base department, he has been pretty impressive.
I mean, I have it, overall, you're talking about a guy, who has a 388 on base and a 478 slug. Mm-hmm. In June, he has a 1224 OPS, which is absolutely absurd. He went on list in May for just shy of 3 weeks. Since he came off the injured list, 283 batting average, 424 on base percentage, 623 slug. And actually, I'll point out too, he's got 5 home runs in those 14 games. He's also stolen 10 bases and hasn't been caught. Not a guy, if you watch him play, not a guy that you would say he's got a 600 slugging. He does not, fill out a uniform in a power hitter kind of way. But what's impressed me when I've watched South Bend is, like, he looks like he's played center field for a long time. He's very solid outfielder, reads the ball off the bat really well. And he's just a real athlete. Like, I'm not surprised that it's 10 steals with no ceilings, because he's clearly an instinctual player, and B, like, a better athlete than he gets credit for.
He leads the system in isolated power, in ISO, higher than anybody else in the organization, which I would not have predicted that prior to the season, obviously. He's interesting because every move the Cubs – I tweeted this at Brett Taylor a couple days ago. Every move the Cubs have made with Carter Trice since he was drafted told me that they believed in his bats. I thought that the move to catcher was interesting, but then after that was like, okay, he was playing first base and DHing, and even when he was in Myrtle Beach putting up, like, not good offensive numbers, like, he was still, like, their first base and DH, and I was like, what is going on here? Every move, he's batted in the middle of the order all the time since he's been in the organization. Like, they seem to believe in the bat, and it's showing off this year. Obviously, when you watch him in the box, it's not the prettiest. It's not the most, like, you don't look at it and say, oh, that's a power hitter. Like, I can tell that's a guy who hits home runs. He's got a closed off stance. It's kind of a wonky looking stance, wonky looking load. Not in a bad way. It's just, it doesn't look like a power hitter where you're like, if I'm picturing a guy hitting tanks, I'm picturing a guy with an open stance that kind of has some natural loft in his swing and all that good stuff. Like, that's not Carter Trice. But like I said, still great numbers. One of the best OPSs in the organization, one of the best BASH metrics in the system. Just been really good across the board. I guess that we see him up in AA Knoxville soon. Probably July is my guess. Very soon. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, he's part of that Cubs Old Dominion pipeline. He he left Old Dominion to go to NC State, and there's something about him that does remind me of our of our favorite Bryce Windham. Not just sort of the move to catcher. Bryce had stuck and Carter it didn't, but there's just a way of that sort of fluidity that they play with. Bryce's it manifested itself as just like elite bat to ball skills. Carter, it's more sort of manifesting itself as like wiry power, just I don't know, like I'm guessing he probably creates bat speed relative to strength better than your average guy. And just really impressive. We'll probably need a sample of another 50 games to be able to start thinking about him as sort of a major league prospect. And hopefully that sample of 50 games includes some double. But this is what an organization in the sort of depth that's hurting in the depth department, like you talked about, like they need things like this happening. And so, we're going to embrace every Carter Trice story we get for the next 2 months because it's an organization that needs more Carter Trices.
While we're on the topic of some deep cuts, we wouldn't be doing our job on this podcast of trying to highlight as many prospects as possible if we didn't talk just a couple minutes here about the performance recently from Edgar Alvarez in South Bend and the performance year long from Cameron Sisneros in Myrtle Beach. Yeah. Now, let's get all the caveats out of the way, right? They're essentially first base prospects only. Cameron Sisneros definitely is. Edgar Alvarez has played some corner outfield, played some third base. But the major caveat is that they're both old for their level. Cameron Sisneros especially is a guy that was a full 4 or 5 year guy in college and is now in Myrtle Beach. He's like 3 or 4 years older than the average player in Myrtle Beach. Way too old for the level, should not be down in Myrtle Beach. But with that being said, Cameron Sisneros is putting up the most ridiculous numbers I've ever seen down in Myrtle Beach. The best numbers across the board in the organization, best OPS, best batting average, I believe, best OPS or best strikeout rate. I think he has a sub 10% strikeout rate. He has a walk rate north of 12%, I believe. He's
23 walks against 15 strikeouts in 157 plate appearances, 352 batting average, 4.78 on base percentage. Because he's also been hit by pitch 8 times. So just a Myrtle Beach team that has hurt for consistent offense except for one spot, and it's him. And he's answered the bell this year. I think that he was probably angling for a South Bend assignment, and he was probably slightly disappointed he didn't get it, with feeling like he was on a level with the Edgar Alvarez's of the world. And the best thing you can do in that situation is prove it. And he's going to spend the second half of the season in South Bend. I'm sure of it because of what he's done on the field.
And I'll point out what's standing out for Edgar Alvarez, then I'll kick it to a question for you. But Edgar Alvarez, he started off the year hitless in his first 7 games. I believe it was 0 for his first like 21, something like that. Did not have a hit in his first 7 games. He's up to right now has an OPS above league average in South Bend in the Midwest League. He has an OPS of 719. He's batting 252, on base percentage of 335. So like he is, after starting off hitless in his first 7 games, is now an average hitter, is a really strong last month and a half or so for Edgar Alvarez. So shout out to him. I think both those guys, I think Cameron Sisneros probably due for a bump up to South Bend tomorrow. Edgar Alvarez, maybe not quite a bump to Tennessee, but he's old for his level as well. So we'll see him maybe in Tennessee or in Knoxville by the end of the season. I want to set it up for a question for you, because I know that it was a question that I got on last week's episode about what have I noticed that there's been changes in the organization during the last 5 years or during my time covering the Cubs system. And one of the things I pointed out was the Cubs' willingness to draft and develop first base / DH only guys, because I talked about on last episode how for years, up until I think it was like 2021, 2022, right around there, the Cubs just used first base in the minor leagues as the third catcher position or like a utility infield. I mentioned Liam Spence. It was that was the name that stuck out the most to me was Liam Spence. That was really a shortstop or second baseman, but they're like, let's throw him at first base, see what happens. and it was a lot of third catchers. Casey Opitz getting a lot of time at first base. Ethan Hearn getting a lot of time at first base. Guys like that.
Yeah.
That kind of swings this conversation to Cameron Sisneros and Edgar Alvarez. And I mentioned on last week's episodes the Hayden McGeary's and Brian Calmers, who obviously have not worked out, but you also get the Johnny Longs and the Matt Mervises that do work out. And so I like seeing Edgar Alvarez and Cameron Sisneros in this organization and say, hey, like, let's see how long you can hit. Can you hit your way up to AAA and then become a part of a trade package as like the number 3 piece in a trade package? That has value, you know?
Yeah, I bet if you did, I bet if we did a study on second baseman and specifically shortstops in the major leagues, I'm guessing the vast majority of them were either first or second round picks or high priced international signings. And so, if you take a shortstop who's, a solid sort of small school shortstop in the 12th round of the draft, you're probably doing that knowing that you have a good leader for your AA team and, 2 years later, but somebody who's not going to make the major leagues, like historically, if we look at the whole history of it, where the first base position has a little more sort of, breakthroughs that have happened over the years. Some guys that, are just that for whatever reason, maybe they don't get drafted high because of their athleticism. Maybe they are super strong, but it hasn't translated to production and it comes later. The first base position is just more able to see breakthrough guys that are breaking through later in their careers. And so I'm wondering if maybe it would have to do with something like that, where if they just went back and sort of studied the history of the game and where successful positions come from, it makes sense to lean less shortstop on day 3 and more first base.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely a clear delineation where it's like, hey, we don't draft first baseman, to now let's take a couple in each draft. And it was very clear one year to the next. I'm curious on like, what went into that decision. That's an ultimate deep cut that I probably wouldn't ever ask a front office person because I'd have 10 other questions before I got to that question. But I'd be curious to find out the answer to that. So,
well, I can't let you do a deep cut without giving one of my own. I was watching some Myrtle Beach this last week, and Jackson Kirkpatrick and Cole Reynolds both jumped out to me as just like 2 relievers that are dominating low A that should spend the second half of the year in high A. I would be remiss to give a full, that I was watching quite close enough to give a full sort of stuff breakdown of those guys. But Kirkpatrick is a beast on the mound and is just,
big boy.
I think, just intimidates the hell out of those sort of young hitters in low A and is striking out. I mean, he's probably got to lead the system in strikeout rate.
Yeah, I think he does north of 40%, 41% strikeout rate for Jackson Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, so I love a low A reliever. It's a long history of me highlighting low A relievers. So if we're calling out A ball first baseman, I'm not going to let the opportunity go to not call out a reliever.
Yeah, shout out. Yeah, he does. He does have the highest strikeout rate in the system this year. The same strikeout rate as Daniel Palencia during his 4 innings at AAA this year. So. Yeah, he's been really, really good. So that'll be exciting to see him. And he, I believe, I don't know if Cole Reynolds is. I know that Jackson Kirkpatrick is a tread guy from the Tyler Zombro tree, right?
Nice.
All right, man. Anything else you want to hit on? Are we wrapping this thing up?
No, we should wrap it up. But we also I want to acknowledge that we're going to need to have an Eli Lovich conversation in the next couple weeks as we get a chance to watch more video of him. He's now in low A, sort of looked the part of belonging at the level, at least out of the gate. And so he's the guy that I'm probably going to watch the closest over the next couple of weeks to just try to get a feel on what pitches he succeeds at, what pitches he struggles with, and just try to sort of wrap my head around, how good of a prospect he is. Because, we talked about the system being such a struggle when you write down, when you get to name 13, 14, 15, if you have a guy like Lovich come up and make you feel really good about writing his name down around there, the system just starts to feel better. And I have him in that range now, but sort of not confidently. I will be I'll be very excited if I can sort of confidently write him down around 11 or 12 in a couple weeks.
Not to pat myself on the back too hard, but it was great timing that for last week's episode, I got a question about breakout guys in the lower levels, specifically like Myrtle Beach, Arizona, stuff like that. And I recorded that episode like almost a month ago. And I mentioned two guys that should be up in Myrtle Beach soon, which were Justin Florentino and Eli Lovich. Nice. And I think it was like right after I recorded. It was a couple weeks after I recorded. By the time the episode dropped, they were both in Myrtle Beach. So excited to watch those two guys specifically over the next 3 months or so.
For sure.
All right, guys, that's all we've got for this episode today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. You can follow Bryan over on Blue Sky at Cubsmith on Twitter. You can find us over on the 1060 West Discord channel. You can find me on Blue Sky and Twitter and all that good stuff. Thank you guys for tuning in on YouTube. Thanks for letting us get over 1,000 subscribers. That was terrific and super fun to see. So give us a like below, a comment, all that good stuff, and subscribe over on all the podcast platforms. So thank you guys so much, and we'll be back in your ears in one short week. Thanks, guys.
Go Cubs.
Yeah.